We are all being pushed to be more and more productive. You can't go anywhere without hearing a conversation about productivity and doing more, getting more done, and how great it feels. But productivity to what end? And ultimately, who does productivity serve? All right, deep thinkers, audacious leaders, welcome back to Nkoyo Unscripted, your weekly dose of unfiltered insights at the intersection of law, leadership, and learning. We're going to get into it, right? This whole notion, this whole conversation about productivity, being productive, staying productive. What does that mean in a world? A lot of progress and innovation has not been maintained has not been spread throughout society, right? So y'all know me, I'm a nerd. I love to read. I had this moment at work where I used the AIs and was able to save myself 4 hours of work. Now, full disclosure, I have a salaried job, so I'm not billed hourly for the work. But it made me think a lot about, as many of my team members, I run a department, so many of my staff, they are hourly. And I have been pushing for them to leverage innovation because I believe that we need to be a part of the AI future, and we need to know it, we need to understand it, we need to grapple with the implications of it. I know some people are like, oh, AI, it's not, this isn't gonna disrupt everything. Everybody gets all freaked out about technology. I don't share the same opinion with a lot of people. Y'all can fight me in the comments about it. But I absolutely think that AI is going to take jobs. I absolutely think that it is not going to be the great equalizer that people are positioning it as, that, hey, we can use AI and we can expand accessibility and all these different things, because of this other social construct thing that's out there called capitalism. And so, if you are a leader, you're leading change. One of the things that we talk about with the nonprofits and social impact leaders that we work with is not just leading audaciously, but also thinking about how we innovate ethically, because the advancements in technology, despite the fact that we don't really want to talk about it, our government doesn't really want to talk about it, we're real quiet about the fact that technology has taken some jobs. There were people who had factory jobs that don't have those jobs today because there wasn't really a way for them to work alongside technology, which we may have seen at other points in time with the cotton gin way back when. You can grab hold of that and figure out how someone uses it towards an aim. We talk about the Ford factories where factories workers used to have to walk around the conveyor belt, and then they figured out how to have the factory worker just stand and move the conveyor belt to them. And then we figured out how we didn't necessarily even need them, and it was maybe cheaper to not have them there, right? We're living in a world where a real thing, and people are able to hire staff who can do great work, hire a team in other countries and pay them significantly less than they would be required to pay individuals here. And in some instances, that actually creates a solid quality of life in other countries because of the global just lack of resource. Some people are living off of $2 a day, which can stretch differently in other places of the world than it does here. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not here to opine, although I have strong opinions about that. And I think colonialism has messed up a lot of. Anyway, I won't go all down all the rabbit holes. But basically, we have lived through a space and time where what used to be skilled labor, things that we had to have people stand there and do rote tasks, etc., technology, we were able through technology to figure out how to eliminate the need for human beings and human error to be a part of and human injury, etc., to be a part of that process. For the longest time with technology, the thought has always been that this would just be replacing, mundane tasks, rote tasks that people were having to do, but now we can figure out how we get the technology to do it. Another really great book that if you haven't checked it out, I would encourage you to pull up into is A World Without Work, Technology, Automation, and oh gosh, I'm going to forget the rest of the title. Let me see if I can pull, A World Without Work. I think I've referenced it before, but it's a great book, and they kind of list out the history of labor and how technology and how people have thought about technology has impacted that space. I know, stick with me. I'm going somewhere real good with this. So we're in a world now where we have artificial intelligence and we have generative artificial intelligence that doesn't necessarily rely on a human being or a human intelligence to move. And it's definitely going to accelerate beyond that. And I was at a training earlier this year where one of the speakers, who was like in the cybersecurity space and the hair care space, which was like a cool little duo of things, was talking about how AI is, let me back up, that anytime we have seen huge shift in like economics, et cetera, in this country, it has been the result of either cheap labor. You can harken back to slavery, right? Freed labor off of the backs of enslaved individuals. We moved to indentured servants and prison work. I think now part of the conversation that we don't really have out loud about undocumented immigrants is that they can be underpaid because they don't have actual paperwork to be able to then fight against forces that are going to overwork them, etc. So you've either had low wages, cheap labor, or you've had disruptive technology. So like the internet happened, right? Computers came, like it was disruptive. It has shifted all the ways that we work. Well, now with AI, what this guy pointed out is that we have both cheap labor and disruptive technology. So you can take your AI and have it do a whole host of things for you that other people used to be paid to do. I have used and I've seen people use AI to help them create a marketing plan, to help them figure out a budget, to review documents. And like in the legal space, right, we'll talk about how, yeah, you can have your chat GPT, Claude, or whatever summarize a opinion that has come out. And so the time that you would have spent reading that yourself is now being taken care of in milliseconds by AI, which can summarize it. If you're really good at your prompts, you can have it do different things. You can ask it different questions, etc. Get a lot of information quickly in what would have taken you a lot of time to do. It can be great for drafting form letters and different things. So stuff that people used to have to do in the knowledge world, knowledge industry, you can now leverage AI to do, and it can save you work. Fast forward to where I'm at, right? So I was able to use AI, save me 4 hours of work. I'm also in a space where we're supposed to be hiring for my team. And I've been having this internal debate around, do I hire for an administrative assistant and preserve a job? Or do I figure out how I leverage AI to do it and not worry about it, right? And these are questions that are coming. That I won't even say they're coming, that are here. And one of the things I really appreciate about A World Without Work is that it has talked about how, inequality and technological unemployment are very closely related, and that there's a reason there's a lot of angst with people about automation and all this technology coming in, because technological unemployment is a very extreme version of this story of people not having access to economic prosperity. And the way that we have historically shared economic prosperity in the United States and maybe even across the world has been through jobs. You go to work, you do something, and you get paid for it. Over time, what one of this really good book, Winners Take All, also really good book, has pointed out that over time, and I think a lot of people know this and feel this, the cost of life, everything has gone up. Record profits for owners of businesses, billionaires, etc., folks who can invest, they're seeing a great boon. And those who are at the economic bottom of the pyramid have not. I think they showed in one instance that over a course of time, I wish I could get it. I should have tabbed it. Here it is. That a student graduating, if she had entered into the top 0.001%, her income would be 7 times higher than it was in 1980, with a cohort average of 122 million. And this is coming from a study that they talk about in this this book. And they say that over the same span of time, for people who are in the bottom half of America, their average pre-tax income rose from 16,000 to 16,200. So if you're at the top or near the top, I mean, she's at the top, right? We're talking about if you're in the 0.001%, your income has pre-tax has gone up 7 times what it was in 1980s. But if you are in the bottom half between 1980 and now in the 2010s, I think is maybe when this thing came out 2014, so about 10 years ago, your income would have gone up $200. Despite the fact that we've had record innovation, progress, growth, change, all these things have been wonderful and happening, but it hasn't been spread out equitably. It hasn't been spread out evenly. By and large, those who have the resources have been able to continue to thrive. In the World Without Work, they talk about, right? So it came out right after the pandemic. He actually rewrote his forward and everything. And so there were some stats out there that, like, if you made $188,000 or more, 71% of those individuals could work remotely. It's no problem. If, however, you're making less than 24,000, only 41% of people could work remotely. Which means what we saw, right? Those who were lower income had to get up, go out into the world in the midst of a global pandemic that we didn't fully understand, didn't have anything to prepare ourselves around it, had to put themselves at risk for very little money, right? We have a system where, as the book is titled, Winners Take All, where those who are the owners, the business owners who come up with a strategy, who go golfing and hang out with their friends and think about how they build a business and put the right people in place, are not doing the hardest manual labor, the most physically exertive labor, but they're getting the most benefit from those who do, right? You think about how much time you spend away from your family, not doing the things that you love, not going on vacation, so on and so forth, because you've got work to do, you've got these tasks, working on the weekend, so on and so forth. And there's a whole movement now to push us all to start being more productive. I mean, it's been going on for quite a bit of time, which usually, and again, there's an article, I don't know if I mentioned this already, there's an article that I read that if you are in the leadership revolts, I will make sure that the article is posted there so that you can get it. If you're not in there, you send me an email. Where's my little email screen? You can definitely contact me, drop me an email here at hello@Nkoyo Speaks. I'll get you the information so you can join the Leadership Revolt. It comes out once a week. We share tips, big thoughts, and tools for you to move yourself forward as a bold, disruptive leader without sacrificing yourself. That's the goal. That's the resistance that I am putting in here in this space, is that we're not all going to just sacrifice ourselves at the foot of capitalism and all other sort of systems that don't necessarily benefit us or don't benefit us equitably or equally. But essentially, this article is talking about how there's so much of this energy around being productive, and that productivity used to be something that organizations were figuring out how to make the systems more productive. And then at some point, it started to shift down to individuals. And now we all carry the burden of improving output produced per unit, which is how you define productivity, output produced per unit. And that productivity now is personal, right? Like, we're all machines and we have to figure out how we become more productive so that we can maintain our jobs. And at times, this need to optimize productivity to become more and more and more productive pits us against our own personal interests. And we're not necessarily getting the financial benefit of it, right? You're more productive. Like in my example, I get a whole lot done, a whole day's worth of work done in 4 hours. Who gets the other 4? Am I required, because in this hypo, I work hourly, so I can't leave unless I would only get paid for 4 hours of work, despite the fact that I've done 8? Or do I have to give them an additional 4 hours, which means that they really only pay me for 8 hours, but they get 12 hours of work? Who gets the benefit? What's the end goal with productivity? Productivity to what end, right? These are questions that we're not always talking about or discussing. And as we are careening into the future of work, the future economy, the AIs are here. There's a great quote that's like, the future is here, it's just not everybody gets to participate in it. As we are continuing to think about how remote work is not just, how work is not just remote, but it's like reimagined, what is ethical? What actually should the nature of that relationship be? I would love to hear from you all. Like, who gets the 4 hours, right? If it's you, are you putting in 4 more hours for the man? Like, are you figuring out what else you can do and knock off your plate, knowing that ultimately, if you save 4 hours every day and you now give 12 hours of work in 8, that you're no longer working a 40-hour work week, even though that's what you're technically getting paid for? Like, is that fair? Does there need to be another conversation around what work looks like, what efficiency looks like, what productivity looks like, so that we're not all sacrificing ourselves at the foot of capitalism and systems that are not equally benefiting us? That's the big question that I have. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you think. Who gets the 4 hours? And how do we, recognizing that generative AI is here, that our government hasn't been thinking about it or talking about it or regulating it, right? Like, there's not been a lot of regulation. We're entering into this world where big tech companies who are building and putting out these large language models also have an outsized presence in our politics and how our lives are shaped, without, a conversation of like what happens. What I really like about the book A World Without Work, and sorry, I'm kind of jumbled here with my thoughts, is like, they acknowledge that we are going to be entering into a world where there is less work, where everybody who wants to work is not necessarily going to be able to find work. And we won't be able to just say, oh, these people are lazy, they're not trying, they're uneducated, blah, 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 the world has shifted. But that the more that we rely on technology, the more that we allow technology to eat up types of work, the fewer opportunities for work that there's just going to be. It's simply that case. And people are like, oh, well, with technology, new work will come out. And so people will pivot into this new thing. And like, that sounds wonderful. It sounds easier and more palatable and like, better for us to all think about, feel, etc. But I don't know that that's necessarily the case. And so that puts us into this like very interesting space of like, if it's not, and if there aren't these new ways of working and people are home, what do we do? Because things still cost, right? In the World Without Work, they talk about how the pandemic was kind of like a test run to see what happens. How will the government really address this? What will they do when you have whole swaths of your population who are not working, not because they lack the desire or the will, or because quote unquote immigrants are taking their jobs, or whoever the other boogeyman is taking their jobs, but because we have allowed technology to eat up some of these spaces? What will we do? And there's one question on it. It's like an economic question of like, what does that mean? How does society function? But the other side, that's not really an economic question. It's more a societal, cultural values question, in my opinion, is what do we do when for the longest time as a society, we have centered work as the sole purpose, the primary purpose, one of the largest purposes in our lives. If you go back to school and it's like, okay, why do people need to get an education, right? There's a lot of corporate input into what happens in our public schools because they want us to prepare and produce for them the next best workers. But when work is no longer central to our lives because everybody doesn't have work to do, what happens to individuals? What happens to how we function and set up and structure our lives? What happens to people's individual purpose when so much and so often we find that people identify themselves in relation to their work? Like, how many times have you gone somewhere and people have been like, oh, hey, well, what do you do? Like, hi, how are you? What's your name? Great. What do you do? Right? Like, it's like those things are very closely connected. And for a lot of us, positive or negative, good or bad, define ourselves by the work that we do. So what happens in a society where people no longer have that defining criteria? We saw during the pandemic, there was some aimlessness, there was some deep reflection, there was some, people kind of thinking like, hey, like what is happening? What's like, should this be how the world is? There was definitely much more of an eye towards the social issues that were happening, right? When we talk about the alleged great racial reckoning. People having more conversations about, I don't want to work. I want to spend more time with my family. I want to be able to do these different things. I'm going to think about how I engage in work in a way that is less demanding of everything that I am. So what happens then when there's fewer work? People don't have access to the economic prosperity that is around them. And our government hasn't thought about or planned or prepared for this. One of the things that's been interesting in this book, Winners Take All, the elite charade of changing the world, is that they talk about how a lot of times these different interventions, this win-win, this do well by doing good, which is something that I hold on to, is like, it's possible. So it really is like challenging me in a lot of my own beliefs, in the ways that maybe my thinking may have been a result of corporations and the corporate impact influence in every single space, including education. But that they talk about how a lot of times these innovations that we have, and for all my nonprofit leaders, I'm sorry, I don't mean, and social impact, all of y'all, I don't mean to come for you. This is in the book. It wasn't me, it's him. It's not me, it's it. That we are creating these solutions that are not disruptive, that maybe put a Band-Aid on a broken leg or a broken system, and that much of our innovation, interventions, etc., in this space are cabined by the fact that we have essentially put the wealthy and the elite in the role of leading this. And a lot of times their leadership in social change, social justice, is to do enough to feel like they have done something great without actually disrupting the system. Oh, I hope I can find this quote because it's so good. One quote that they say in here in this book, and again, this is Winners Take All, is that people with the most to lose from genuine social, the left and the right now in our political space, and how we both are seeing that there needs to be something done, something has to change, but we definitely have very different views about how that change should happen. But essentially, like, here's the quote that I really, really wanted. I was stalling so I could get this quote. Much of what appears to be reform in our time is, in fact, the defense of stasis. That it feels like, we're doing this thing to like reform education and like make it more equitable, ensure that more kids can read. But in fact, really, the reforms are just to make it moderately better, but like ensure that there is still a ruling class that is more educated, has more access to information, knowledge, and power, and can use that to its benefit, which we're seeing now in crazy ways with like misinformation, disinformation, so on and so forth. It's creating these tools to help people figure out how to manage their money rather than disrupting a system that's not paying people enough, that has not kept up with that has not allowed wages to keep up with any of the changes, any of the prosperity that is definitely held and cabined at the top. And so to bring it right back, right? We're in an era where we're all being asked to be more productive. We're all feeling the need, the tension to be more productive. And the question comes, to what end are we being more productive? And whose purpose does our productivity serve? And I would encourage you as a leader in your space to be thinking about that when you are doing performance evaluations and talking about whether someone has been productive, whether they've met all of their goals, and ask yourself whether those goals in the first place were reasonable in relation to what you were compensating someone for the job. I want you to think about that as a leader also, whether you're running a department or something and you're pushing yourself to be more productive. What's the end goal? If you're running a business, what's the end goal, right? Because we run the risk of running ourselves into the ground in this quest to be able to say that we've done enough things, that we've gotten enough gold stars, without really setting out and understanding for ourselves what is success, what is reasonable for the season that we're in, and how do we factor rest? Because we're not machines and we're not going to be able to keep up with AI and all other technology. Use it. I think people should really know it, understand it, see how it can be beneficial, see where it may be harmful, because we as people have to actually start pushing our government to regulate in this space, to start making some values-based decisions about whether we're going to lean all in on technology, which we know will ultimately benefit the wealthier, because that is how all of innovation apparently has that's who all of innovation has benefited to date, or how we're going to make sure that innovation doesn't come at the expense of human beings, and that we can have a balance there, that we can all thrive, that we can have economic prosperity can be shared around us, when we know that we have systemically been setting up systems that have prevented people from moving forward, that we know that even if there is reskilling that needs to happen, some of our population are so far behind I don't know how they will catch up. When I ran for school board, I was saying, literacy, the fact that we keep talking about how kids are going to make sure kids can read, um, is important. It has to happen. Like, it's foundational. Absolutely. Like, I'm not arguing that. But because we just keep going back and forth about which way we're going to do it, even though there's data that shows like what works, and we can just multiply and invest in what works. But the fact that we keep going and wagging our tail, chasing our tail about this issue, means that we don't get to bigger issues like, how do we make sure people have the critical and creative thinking skills that are necessary to survive in a world where deep fakes exist, as well as the possibility to create your own avatar to do different things. Like, there's a whole metaverse. There's a whole, like, whole alternate universes that are essentially being created in one space. And we're still struggling to make sure kids understand the difference between fact and fiction. We're still trying to make sure that they can read and comprehend what's going on around them, and they can feel a part of it. We can't prepare them for the future economy because they're not prepared even for this current economy, and things are moving so quickly. If you hear me say nothing, you'll always hear me say that it's not just that change is constant. It is that the rate of change is accelerating. Like, if you think about how phones have evolved from when you first got your first ever cell phone to where they are now, this is our lifetime, right? And these innovations are continuing to happen at record pace. And so we have to think not just about productivity and hold on to that as a personal a quest to do. Be productive. I'm not saying don't be productive. Be productive, but know to what end and to whom it serves, because otherwise we run the risk of running ourselves into the ground and never really getting to a place of rest and space and joy, etc., because we're so busy trying to optimize ourselves as though we are technology, and we're not. We're human beings. We're different. And we have to have questions. We need to have bolder questions around what the future of work looks like. It's not just, oh, I want to work remotely and I'm going to work 24/7 because I want to prove that I'm as effective at home as I would have been in the office. It's what should be happening in this new world of work. And what's the reality for this world when we know that there's not going to be enough work for everyone? Because one, there already isn't enough work for everyone, right? Like, how many people talk about applying hundreds of times before they get an offer? How many people do we have who are underemployed in this society, right? We like to make it seem like this is a human failing, like, oh, these people, they don't have the skills, they didn't do this, they didn't do that, and not addressing the fact that we have a whole system, a whole system that has created winners and losers based on who has access to economic prosperity and not. And we need to start pushing and challenging the system, and not just holding each person responsible for how they have been trying or able to maneuver a system, many of which was never set up to assist them, right? There's data out there that says that the socioeconomic status that you were born into is likely the one that you will die from, that it is very few people who pull up those bootstraps and work their way on up, that is not actually the reality of most, even though we try to make it seem as though people are not working hard enough to get themselves out of economic circumstances. And so I don't really have a summation there, right? I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question of who gets those 4 hours when we all become more productive, who gets the benefit of those time. the people person in me says, hey, we should be recovering this time and we should rest. We should resist a system that tries to optimize to the extent that it's going to essentially destroy society and life and earth, right? There's this whole concern about, with capitalism. And I don't even mean to be the person who's like, oh, I'm super anti-capitalism. I'm struggling and I'm evolving in my own thoughts about it. It is here. It is the system that we have. But one of the challenges with capitalism is that it is voraciously in search of profit. And what we have seen is that without some regulations or guardrails, it will pursue profit to the demise of the people and things in the way. And so we have to, as bold leaders who are designing the future of work, because the decisions that we're making about what work looks like, I'm a mother for my children, for children's children, for us 10, 15 years and now, are decisions that we are either talking about in this current election or not. They are decisions that you're making in your job, your workplace, about how you leverage technology and innovation and how you spread that. I have one client, they're so incredible. Because the reality is that your teams are likely optimizing themselves as best they can. Maybe you're bringing in tools, you're having them train and reskill, get project management, this, that, time management, all these different things that we're all doing to some end and for some purpose. But we don't have to burn ourselves out, and we don't have to burn out our teams in the process. And we need to be very clear about what the goal is so that we don't just keep running and running and running and running and running and running and running until we have burned ourselves out. So that's all I've got on that. It's time to segue into your girl's favorite part. So we're going to get up in here. You know it. It's time. Y'all. This week's That's So Unserious is brought to us by Georgia's Life Act. That is House Bill 481, which passed, I believe, in 2019. And you may have seen it in the news recently because at least 2 women, unfortunately, have lost their lives, and people have been able to, or are suggesting that it is a result of this very bill here. Y'all, if you've never read or seen a House bill, I'm showing it here for that particular purpose because I need you to see that even just the way it looks is hard to read. I am a trained attorney. I don't always love reading statutes and bills because it's all the here 4,000 and whatnot. I mean, lawyers, like, can we collectively decide to write better, to write clearer? But anyway, this bill is out here. There have been challenges to it in terms of whether it's vague. I think that that the way that it has played out has led doctors to feel unsure about when they can intervene, exactly when they can get involved to help save a life. So the irony is that this thing is called the Georgia Life Act, and life is an acronym for Living Infants Fairness and Inequality Act. They do some really great work in here to posit that, the 14th Amendment should protect the fetus. And I want to just be clear that my conversation here is not a moral conversation. We can have a different debate about whether we think when life happens, when the morality of abortion care, we can debate that. One of the things that I absolutely loved about law school, I had a family law professor who, one, ensured that I would never go into family law. Same with my criminal defense lawyer, because I was like, it's too messy over here. It is too complicated over here. But she talked a lot about how sometimes family law and the laws are used to regulate morality, even though there's not necessarily a basis for it. And so there's cultural things, there's moral things that sometimes get regulated into law that don't necessarily have the legal background or force of neutrality that we might think or believe that they do. You have this tension where doctors, because of this law and this recognition of things, are at this place now where it's like, whose life do we save? Whose life is more important, which is incredibly challenging. But even more so, it creates a world where politicians who are not medical doctors, are now inserting themselves into instances where we would love for people. They have an extensive training program and process that goes into to do this deep level of knowledge, decision making, etc. And now doctors want to fleeing Georgia. They're not trying to come here because it's confusing, especially if you are in the obstetrics and gynecology space, which is wild because we already has the highest maternal mortality rate. Period. It's insane. But beyond just the fact that like you can't get great care during childbirth and pregnancy, we don't even have a lot of the supports around it for medical care in general. Where I live in Georgia, there are huge hospital deserts or pockets of the place where you can't access a hospital. It's all the things of challenge. But now we are also creating this world where doctors are afraid to give care because they're not sure whether they will be investigated, whether they will be arrested, whether the decision will be able to determine that it was an abortion or a miscarriage, and whether they were providing care that is legal or illegal, and that line being created by people who don't have a background in healthcare. There are not a ton of doctors who are sitting under the gold dome making these laws. This issue has absolutely become really politicized, and unfortunately, at least two women, have lost their lives because doctors were not sure whether they could provide preventable care. And so that is this week's unserious. It is super unserious, but what is serious is your ability to get out and vote, to make your voice heard, to ensure that we are putting people into office who have the temperament and the discernment and the ability to put country over party at the forefront when they're making laws that are going to impact our lives. And so I really hope and encourage you to vote not just at the top of the ticket for the sexy campaign of who's going to be president, but to go all the way down ballot. You can always go to your Secretary of State's office and wherever they do elections and actually get a copy of your sample ballot and spend some time to research who's on your ballot so that you can make sure that you're making the best decision for yourself and your family. I know there's been a lot of feelings about voting and whether it matters and the Electoral College and all these different things that make it a real challenge. And the one thing that I will say is that nothing changes in this country without a vote. That is the system that is set up, at least for now. Who knows? Folks have different plans, but nothing changes without a vote. That is the power. And the status quo has been that many of us, women especially, Black people, people of color, that we didn't get to vote. That was the status quo, that our voices weren't heard, they weren't asked for, they weren't looked at, they weren't sought after in this democracy. And so if you're a disruptive leader who wants to change the way things happen, then we need to get out there and make sure that we're letting people know that sitting at home and not voting is the status quo. That is what the system relies on. It doesn't expect us to come out in numbers, to be knowledgeable, and to cast a ballot from the top of the ticket all the way down. There will likely be referendums on your ballot. There will be issues that are going to be decided on your ballot. And so I would encourage you to print it out, spend some time, maybe it's 30 minutes a day between now and the election, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, spend some time seeing who's on your ballot, what issues are on your ballot, what information is out there for you so that you can make a responsible decision for you. If it was useful, please make sure that you subscribe. But if you have an something that's so unserious that you came upon, please send it to me. I'd love to share it on the platform. If this was useful, please like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you next week. We're going to be going into some series talking with some other really audacious women who've been doing some cool things who can help us think about how we lead more innovatively, audaciously, without burning ourselves out. So again, thank you for joining me and spending time and getting these weekly insights at the intersection of law, leadership, and learning. Until next time, go lead audaciously.